Hey folks, welcome in. This is Chris with Alpenglow Digital. Here in part 2 in our mini-series on sending emails with Power Automate, we are going to take the email that was created in part 1, which looks something like this, and we are going to add some styling to it so it looks a bit more professional. So by the end of this video, we are going to have an email that looks like this. So again, placeholder image, placeholder logo. The image, in this case at the top, is styled a little bit more nicely. It's restricted to a width that makes more sense for email. It's also not quite as tall. We added some more dynamic values from our SharePoint list that are here. We add the field names here. We add some breakout headers here so that folks can see request details, and then also kind of some placeholder text for what happens next. And my hope is that by the end of this video, your email starts to look a little bit more how you might like it to when you send it to folks in the real world. We're going to touch a little bit on CSS and HTML. We're not going to dive too deep into it. If you already have familiarity with HTML and CSS, you're going to be in great hands. We're not going to do anything too crazy because once again, this is email, and so you just don't have a lot of options. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hey folks, welcome into Power Automate. Here's where we left our flow after part 1 in our series. As a reminder, this flow sends an email to someone when they populate our SharePoint list. We had a little Power App that we allowed folks to submit requests to. That populated our SharePoint list and then sent an email to the person that submitted the request. And here's what that email looks like. A little bit of static text and some dynamic values pulled in, the SharePoint list ID, the type of event, the number of guests, and then we had an image and some other static text. So what we're going to do in this video is really enhance the email itself. We're going to enhance the HTML and do a little bit of styling to the email, and it'll just look much more formal, much prettier than it did after the end of the first video. So what we're going to do is dive into the HTML of our email. And what I actually like to do is, I've had some trouble with styles getting wiped out in the new designer in Power Automate, so I'm actually going to toggle this off and go back to the old designer. Alrighty, here we are in the old designer. So I'm going to open up the send an email step, and we're going to clear out all of the HTML that we had here from our previous video. We are going to use a big table for our email HTML. This is pretty common in HTML emails these days. Again, if you've done web development before, there are a lot of great styles and formats that you can use for your content. It's easy to use Flexbox or Grid to align items. You're really just stuck in email using tables and other really kind of archaic forms of formatting. So we're going to start with a table, and this is going to kind of wrap all of our content. We're going to have 3 main sections within our table. We're going to have a header, which is where our banner image goes, a body where a lot of the details of our request go, and then we are going to have a table footer that has a little logo and then a link off to a team alias. So let's start by creating our 3 main sections within our table tag. We're going to have a T head, make sure we close everything out, T body, and T foot. And inside each of these are going to be rows. They all use the same TR tag. So I'm going to create one of these, pop this in here, pop this in here. And then instead of TD for table cell in the header, there are TH tags or table header tags. And then within the body, we're going to do a TD, and we're going to do the same thing for the footer. Again, typing this way in Power Automate is pretty rough from an HTML perspective. You don't get a lot of I think, error helpers in case you would like to close a tag or things like that. So you may elect to use VS Code or another text editor to kind of write your HTML and then paste it in here and then add kind of dynamic fields if you want. But for the purpose of this video, we're just going to kind of do our best to write plain HTML here. Okay, so we've got our general layout. So again, each of these 3 components, the head, the body, and the footer, each have 1 row currently with 1 cell. So what I'd like to do in my table is within the body of the table, I'd like to have 2 columns. On the left column, I'd like to have a field name, like event name, description, event type. And then on the right column, I'd like to have the actual value from our submission. And so what I want to do is I want to add a second column to the body. And what I need to remember then is that this table is now 2 columns wide. And so I need to go into my header and say, hey, I want you to stretch 2 columns. So I'm going to add call span equals 2, because this is going to have our banner image, and we need the banner to span across both cells now, where it was previously just 1. We're going to have it across 2. And in my footer, it looks like I'm missing, maybe I commented that on accident. We had our cell here, and I want to add another cell because I'm going to have a logo in one of them, and then I'm going to have a call to action button that kind of folks can reach out to my alias if they have questions. So our header has 1 cell that spans 2 columns. Our body now has 2, and our footer also has 2. So before we stare at this HTML too much, let's just get an email going so that we can kind of see what we're working with. So in my header, again, this is going to be my image tag, my banner image. Again, pick any image that you'd like. I've got one hosted here. And one thing that I want to specify pretty explicitly in email is the width of my table, and in this case, my image. Again, a lot of different email clients, some desktop clients, some on the web. It's really difficult kind of to style in a way that works for everything. So I'm going to give this for now a width of 700. This is just my banner image. And then I'm also up here in the table going to set this width to 700. Again, because it's in the table header and within the image, you don't need to specify units. I can't remember if this is pixels or point or how they determine this width. I think it is probably pixels. So we have our table. This just helps things not get too wide. Table is going to be 700 pixels wide. So is the image. And in the body, now I want to add, again, for the purpose of this first demonstration, a field. So this one's going to be called event type. Again, this is the static part in the first column, which is the leftmost column. And in the right column, I'm going to come down and grab a dynamic value from here, which is the type of event value. And so now I've got this set up in one of our rows. And in our footer, I'm going to add another image. And this is going to be our little logo. Again, I just have something hosted. Feel free to use whatever you'd like. And this one I don't want to be very big, and I'm just going to have it set to be 125. And in the other cell, I'm going to do a link. And so this is just going to be a link to our team alias if folks have questions. So I'm going to say questions. Please reach out to our team. Again, just going to close this A tag. And if you want to set up an email link, it'll be a mail to. So you type mail to : and then your email address. So I'll just use mine. Lowdigital. Stop and lowdigital.com. Okay, great. So we have a banner image, just one row in our body that has event type and the dynamic value for that. And in our footer, we have our logo and then an A tag with a mail to link to our team if folks have questions. So before we get into styling too much or expand on our table body, let's just see what this looks like. So to test this, I'm going to go up here and click test. I am going to use a recent trigger. And what I did before this video is I submitted something through my little Power App like I did in the first video. And so we're going to save our flow changes and we're just going to test it. And so let's see what this HTML looks like in an email. So the flow ran successfully, thankfully. So if we hadn't been missing, if there had been issues with our HTML or the fields that we put in dynamically, this would not probably succeed. So you'd see an error. And let's go grab that email. All right, the email ran, and here's what it looks like. So it came through. We've got our banner image. We've got our column on the left here with a static value, which is the field name that we typed, and then the dynamic value brought in from this submission, which is the birthday party. We have our little logo. Again, these are all just kind of placeholders, and our link if folks have questions. So structurally, this looks good. What I want to do is, before we add styling and make this look a little bit more professional, I want to get all of my fields in here that I'd like in my email. So we're going to switch back over to Power Automate and keep working on our HTML. Back in Power Automate, let's add another few rows to our body. So again, I'm going to add a row a cell, and we're actually going to have two cells here because, again, we want one on the left with the field name and one on the right with the actual value. So I have a row here. So I'm going to do event name here and then event type here. And after that, I want the description of the event and the number of guests. So here is the event name. And then in here, I want to, again, go to my dynamic content and look for what we're calling event title. And then we have event type. And down here, let's do event description. And in here, we're going to look up description. And lastly, number of guests. And we're going to add number of guests here. So let's see if I can find that. Let's search here. Guests, number of guests. Perfect. Okay. So now our body is going to have 4 rows. One for name, event type, description, and number of guests. And what I want to do is, in addition to having a bunch of details about the event, I also want to add a section which kind of gives folks a little bit of context for like what comes next. So they've submitted a request. Here's all their information. What happens afterwards? So what I'd like to do is add some sections within our body. One of the sections is, hey, here's your request details. The next section is, here's some guidance on what happens next. So for these headers, they are going to be their own row, and they're going to span across both columns. So I want these to be inside the table body still. So I'm going to add a new row, and then I'm going to add a new cell. But just like we did for the header, I want the call span to be 2, which means this one cell is going to take up 2 columns. So this is the header that's going to go above the event details or the request details. So I'm just going to call it request details. We'll use like this. And then I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to copy this whole row. And after all of our request details, we're going to come down to the bottom, add another row. And this is going to be our header for kind of the what happens next section. What happens next? And then after that, we're going to have one more row. I'm actually going to copy the same thing. So what I did here is, again, added another row, another cell that spans the full width, so 2 columns. And this is just going to be some guidance on what happens next. So if you had kind of like an FAQ section, if you had an SLA that you wanted to specify here, you could do that. What I'm going to do is just go grab some placeholder text and put it here. Got my text. I'm going to paste it in. Might be a little lengthy. Maybe don't need that quite that much. Okay. So now in our body, we've added a request details header, a lot of other fields about the request. We've also added a what happens next header, and then just some placeholder text, which could be guidance for next steps. So let's test this again and see how things look. So we reran that test, and it has all the data, again, from the previous entry. And here's what the email looks like now. So again, no change to the banner. We now have request details and what happens next. You can see there's nothing else here to the right of them because this spans the full width of the email, which is 2 columns. We also have our new fields here. Name is here. Description is here. You can see that by default, these look like they kind of align to the center of the table cell. So you'd expect kind of event description to be up here. And so we'll change that in a second. Number of guests, 50. And then our text for kind of what happens next. So structurally, this looks how I want it to. And now the exciting part is going to be styling things. So let's jump back over to Power Automate and look a little bit at styling emails. All right, now that we have our email structurally set up the way we want it to look, it's time to make it look a little bit pretty. So let's add some styles to our email. If you would like to, and you're familiar with inline styles, where you just add styles directly in the HTML tag, you can do that. It works fine within Power Automate, no issues. I think it's okay to do if you have really kind of simple styling you want to do. But what I would recommend doing is just opening a style tag and writing CSS kind of the way you may be used to if you come from a web development background. So this will allow you to do things like IDs and classes and select cells or HTML types, pardon me, and table cell in our case. And I think this way is a little bit cleaner. It's easy for somebody to come in here, see your email, and understand kind of your styling and how it applies. So what let's do firstly is add some styles to our table cells. So again, you can select your table cells by typing the HTML tag name. Again, these are right here. And let's add a little bit of padding so that everything has a little bit of space to breathe. So maybe like padding of 10 pixels. We noticed there that the field names on the left were middle aligned, and let's have those be vertical aligned. I think that looks a little bit better. So vertical align will help ensure things in your table cell align to, in this case, the top. And let's add a border maybe to the bottom of each of the cells. 1 pixel. Again, this is kind of the width of your border. The style of your border, you can do dashed or solid. And then I have kind of a gray color that I like, which is F2. One thing you'll notice if you've styled tables much is they will, if you have kind of table styling or border styling, you need to have border collapse on, and this will just make sure that you don't have like double borders next to each other. So we're gonna add border collapse equals collapse, and then let's give our cells a background color of kind of another gray. F8 is what I like. Okay, so we've got that for our table cells. And what I want to do is ensure that these two rows, the request details, which are kind of our headers, and the what happens next, that those have similar styles and they kind of stand out from the rest of the cells. So I'm actually going to use classes just like you would in traditional web development. So we're going to give this a class of header row. And we're also going to do the same thing for our request details. So now up in our CSS, we can just select that class, header row, and let's give it a background color. I have a nice kind of blue that I think matches the logo that I like. So I'm going to add that here. And then since it's a darker blue, I want to add, make sure that the text color is white here. The last thing that I want to do is let's add, we have our table footer. So let's go ahead and add a class to this right here, this cell, because I want this, again, it's going to be left aligned by default, and I like it to be kind of right aligned. So I'm going to add a class called footer CTA. I'm going to add that there, and then let's actually copy this, bring this up to the top, and after our header row, let's reference that class, footer CTA, and let's do a text align of right. So in addition to text align right, I want to add vertical align middle. And so this was the default value for table cells, but we did override it up here when we had things vertical align top. And I think that made sense for the body of the email. But what I like is in our footer, we have our logo on the left, which is already going to be pretty tall. So if the CTA or the little link for questions was set to top, you'd notice that that wasn't kind of aligned with the logo. So I'm going to reset that to be vertically aligned in the middle, and that'll kind of match the logo. I think that'll be a cleaner look. One other thing that I'd like to do is for our column names, in this case, event name and other things like that, I'm going to add a strong tag, and this will bold these. And so they stick out a little bit better, add a little bit of contrast. So again, make sure you add an opening strong tag and a closing strong tag to each of these. And then this is getting very close to probably looking the way I would like it to. The one other thing I'd like to change is for our headers that kind of span both columns in our table, especially in the table body specifically. I do want these to look a little bit bigger. So I'm going to add header tags, HTML header tags to these. So maybe request details is like kind of the main header, and then what happens next is maybe like a header 2. And so what I know about these is that they're going to come with some default margin, usually on the bottom, sometimes on the top too. And I don't want that to be the case since cell padding is going to take care of kind of the spacing. So I'm going to say h1, h2. This is styles that apply to both types of tags. I'm just going to set this margin to 0, margin 0. Okay, so we've got our styling all done, I think. So let's take a look at how this now looks in email. All right, we reran that test, and here's our final output. So again, no changes to the banner, You can see our headers here have a nice dark color that kind of matches the logo. We didn't touch the font size. You may decide this is a little bit too big, but this is the natural H1 font size for Outlook. This is H2. We have a nice background color for our cells, and you can see this kind of faint border that divides the rows. We have our question CTA that's vertically aligned, kind of with the middle of the cell. I think that lines up nicely with the logo. And then we have our static field names here on the left that are bolded, and then the dynamic values. Alrighty, folks, that does it for our second and final part in this little mini series on sending emails with Power Automate. We will have a few more future videos which touch on some niche use cases for emails. We do some things with hosting images in SharePoint and then how to bring those into your Power Automate flow. And we have a cool little use case where you can send images kind of dynamically based on like a field. So in this case, it could be if it's a birthday party, you have a certain image. If it's a wedding, you have a certain image. So look out for a future video on that. In this video, we just wanted to briefly cover how to style an email. And again, if you come from a traditional web development background, you won't be able to use all the awesome styles and tags that you have access to in traditional web development. Email is really kind of in the Stone Age, and so you'll use a lot of really simple things like background colors and table tags, borders, bolds, stuff like that to construct your emails. But we find ourselves using emails for a lot of use cases like we outlined in this video. You've got maybe a front-end form in Power Apps, somebody submits a request, and then you send them a confirmation email. And maybe when you're done with that request, you have a status column and you mark that completed, and that also triggers a different email that says your request is done. So either way, there are a bunch of cool things. Go figure out how this applies to your own work, build some cool emails, do a bunch of testing, and have fun. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.